Call government orders of the day, numbers 1 to 6.
Environmental Protection Authority Bill, Climate Change Response Amendment Bill, Hazardous Substances and New Organisms Amendment Bill Number 2, Imports and Exports Restrictions Amendment Bill, Ozone Layer Protection Amendment Bill, Resource Management Amendment Bill, third reading.
Honourable Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, I move that the Environmental Protection Authority Bill, the Climate Change Response Amendment Bill, the Hazardous Substances and New Organisms Amendment Bill, the Imports and Exports Restrictions Amendment Bill, the Ozone Layer Protection Amendment Bill and the Resource Management Amendment Bill we now read a third time. Mr Speaker, it's a pleasure to be at the last stage of this important reform to the government arrangements for New Zealand's environment in creating the Environment Protection Authority. The idea of an EPA was first proposed in National's 2006 Blue-Green Vision discussion paper. It was included in our 2008 election policy, was introduced in a preliminary form in our 100-day RMA reform bill, and now alongside these bills is being progressed into an independent Crown entity from the 1st of July. At the core of this reform is the view that the Environment Ministry needs to be the strong and competent policy advisor, the Environment Protection Authority needs to be the arm's-length regulator, and that the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment plays a key role as the auditor of our overall environmental governance system. The parallel in the economic and financial sphere is Treasury as the policy advisor, the Reserve Bank as the regulator, and the Auditor General. The next stage in our work programme is to beef up the Parliamentary Commissioner's Office role in independent environment reporting. When completed, this reform will, in National's view, give New Zealand a first-class and robust environmental system of governance. Mr Speaker, I do welcome the broad consensus in this House with all parties supporting the establishment of the EPA, but I am disappointed that some are choosing to oppose this bill on pretty spurious grounds. Let me go through each of the arguments put forward by the opposition in the committee stages. Labour's Louisa Wall said she opposed the bill because it contained a ministerial veto on EPA consent decisions. No such provision exists anywhere in the bill. The irony is that the only veto provision where a minister could overturn a consent decision was actually repealed by National in our 2009 RMA Amendment Bill after it was so badly discredited by Chris Carter over the Whangamata Marina. Her contribution only made Labour look pathetic. We had a far more thoughtful contribution from Charles Chauvel. His concern was the lack of provision in this bill for environmental regulation in the EEZ. This is an issue on which we agree, and work is well underway to achieve this. The debate here is only over timing. The government, following the environmental tragedy in the Gulf of Mexico, sought an independent review of our regulatory system for offshore petroleum to be sure that our reforms would provide the most robust regime possible. This is complex policy and we want to get it right. It needs to be carefully intermeshed with the existing fisheries, transport, mining and other statutes so that we don't have double-ups, nor do we want gaps. My plan is to have a bill before the House in coming months to address this. One of the other repeated objections was that the Environmental Protection Authority did not have a clear protection mandate in its purpose and that somehow this made the bill deficient. The reality is that the EPA will be responsible for the administration of a whole number of acts. The RMA, HASNO, Climate Change and Ozone Protection Acts each have their own purpose. Many of these make specific reference to environmental protection in their purpose statements. The problem is that if we go establish some alternate purpose for the EPA beyond that in those acts, we end up with legal confusion over whether it's the purpose statement in the EPA Act or in the other act that would be superior, which would trump which, and we don't want that sort of confusion. For members opposite to argue that the EPA has no mandate to protect the environment is to argue that the acts covering resource management, ozone protection, hazardous substances, new organisms, climate change, all of which Labor voted for and many they designed, do not protect the environment. That's nonsense, and it really does expose how shallow Labor's opposition to this bill is. The most extraordinary contribution in the committee stages was from Labor's Brendan Burns. He lambasted the government for balancing economic growth with environmental protection, saying you either had to have one or the other, and that Labor was for the environment. We now know in this election year that Labor is not in favour of economic growth. It's not in favour of jobs. It's not in favour of increasing living standards. I'm looking forward to campaigning on National's rational blue-green platform of marrying together economic growth with sound environmental management against the anti-growth Labor policy that Brendan Burns is now advocating. In contrast, I do want to compliment the very constructive role the Maori Party has played on our decisions on the EPA. The Maori Party brings a strong cultural ethos of sustainable development to this work, recognising that Maori do see use and development of New Zealand's natural resources as important, while also showing a strong commitment to sustainable environmental management. The Maori Party advocated for a separate Crown entity. They argued for the Maori Advisory Committee, and they argued for appropriate recognition of the Treaty of Waitangi, and all these are contained in this bill. I wish to conclude with some important thank yous, Mr Speaker. I wish to acknowledge the good policy work that was led by Dr Paul Reynolds and the Ministry for the Environment, and the work of PCO in supporting the government in putting this bill together. I want to thank the board and staff of IRMA, who, caught up in the winds of change, have retained a strong focus on doing their existing job well. I also want to thank the Select Committee, particularly its Chair Chris Okenvold, and for its members for the work that they put into getting the important detail of this bill right. The idea of the EPA is an idea whose time has come. The key to its success will be in a fair, effective and efficient regulator of our environment. We don't want an expensive bureaucracy nor a feeble rubber stamp. We want a technically expert, professional organisation that will protect that which is precious to all New Zealanders while enabling our economy to grow and prosper. I wish the new authority well. It is so important to the success of our country.
The question is the motion be agreed to.
Speaker.
Charles Chevelle.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I'd like to start by acknowledging the Minister's very full contribution in the